We have this resistance to change. Because of that, we have to help our humans figure out what's constraining or keeping them from changing. How do we rewire their neural pathways to move through whatever that resistance is?
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everyone, it's Ben Eubanks, host of We're Only Human. I'm really glad you're here with us and looking forward to a fun conversation today with Jessica Teitjen. We're going to talk about some of the interesting things that she's been working on, some of the exciting ideas that she can share with all of you. And I'm keeping it so broad right now. I want her to dive into some of that fun stuff as we go through this. So Jessica, you and I have been working to get this scheduled for quite some time, and I'm so excited that you're here with me now. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. Before we get into some of the fun stuff we've got to cover today, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, so I spent the bulk of my career, I went to law school, then I went into the corporate space, spent the bulk of my career in executive leadership positions, leading HR, IT, a lot of the operations functions in the corporate world. And a number of years ago in 2021, I thought I had successfully conquered the pandemic with twin toddlers and a young son, and I'd done it all. And we had just won another Gallup Global Workplace Award. And then our organization got hit with a ransomware attack. And when that happened, it was the tipping point for me to find myself in burnout, although it took me a number of years to really label it as such, to really be able to identify it. And so that put me on a trajectory to try to figure out how I went from feeling so high, like I'd accomplished the world and we had accomplished so much as an organization, to ending up in such a burned out state. And that put me into studying kind of the science of human performance. And as I dove into the neuroscience of human performance and how humans actually are meant to operate, I really discovered the disconnect between our work practices, the ways in which that we work and we manage people, which are perfectly aligned in many cases to produce business outcomes, but are not aligned to produce human outcomes, are not aligned to produce positive results for humans. And so that really is the core of my purpose now, is to look at how do we create practices in the workplace that don't just create business outcomes, but also create positive outcomes for humans so that it can do both. So rather than either or, how do we do it so it accomplishes both?
Let me rewind for 1 second, because you just said I went to law school and then obviously I went into HR and IT. Obviously, doesn't everyone do that? What was the connection there?
So I started doing in-house legal. And then, as often happens in a small organization, if you do a good job, they give you more things to do. Mm-hmm. And so first they had no HR. So I took that on and I really fell in love with human performance and people and helping to make people be their best. And then I started to get into, okay, how do we do that with technology? So that's where I ended up taking on IT. And then they just keep giving you more things to do, right? You get to a certain level and they just keep giving you more responsibility. So that's how I continued on. What was great about that was that I got to not just experience HR from an HR perspective, but I was using those practices, right, in the business, in running and executing on and for our customers. So it was a great opportunity to be able to see HR practices from both the expert, but then also the person in the business.
Okay, interesting. All right, fun. Thank you for letting me rewind. Occasionally I hear one of those things like someone's career, they just like gloss over, like it's logically, I just went ahead and did this. And I'm always like, let's rewind and cover that piece, because it's always fun to see where someone ends up. In case someone's out there listening right now and you're like, goodness, I started somewhere radically different, or I'm going somewhere radically different. That's where I want to go. Just there's some hope for you that it's not always a linear path. So going back to what you were sharing a minute ago, you talked about, I wrote it down this way. It's not exactly the word you used, but basically a disconnect in work design and the human outcomes we're looking for. And so give me an example of what you actually mean by that, because that sounds really sciencey. Talk about what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to a lot of our work practices, so a perfect example is your traditional performance review process, right? So in our workplaces, we sit down to review performance, and almost doesn't really matter, whether you're using ratings or not. It's a spectrum of how bad of an impact is it going to have. But anytime you go into a review conversation like that, the human body's response is to go into a fight flight state because your potential career is at risk, how potentially your compensation, if those performance reviews are attached to compensation, which then gets to your ability to pay and support your family. So the body, the nervous system goes into this fight flight response, and that shuts down your ability to learn and grow or create new neural pathways in your brain. And so while we think that practice is going to help direct or help provide people feedback on their performance, it's actually shutting them down so that they can't integrate anything that they're hearing in that conversation. So that's an example of where it's misaligned what we're doing. Our intent of what we're doing may create results because it may institute fear or concern. And so there's some degree of change, but it's not really creating a positive human outcome for the people that are experiencing it.
This reminds me of this idea I read years ago, and it's so many business books I've read over the years, and some of them are great, some of them are, but I get like an idea from all of them. And one of the ideas that stuck with me from a book years ago called The Respect Effect, he talks about how at work, our brains are wired to look for danger, look not just at work, but in life, right? Your brain is there to keep you safe. The first time you touch that hot stove, it teaches you don't do that again. And so we're looking for those things in our work. Like someone's going to steal my idea. I've worked in a place that's toxic. When they're talking, they're probably talking about me. And you start thinking through these things. But when we can shift that and put someone in a place where they are accepted, respected, appreciated, when they have those right things around them, that last little bit of creativity, of effort, of focus that they've been holding back, maybe even unintentionally, they can put that then into their work. So there's some good outcomes on the other side of that. Talk about what it takes for us as an HR audience to actually start doing something about this. Because I don't know, as the training I had as an HR leader didn't prepare me for, okay, how do I make someone completely comfortable with all of these things, right? How do I minimize or mitigate that fight or flight response? Because we have to still measure performance. We still have to know those things. So how do we make those things and reconcile them, essentially?
Yeah, and it's interesting because Gallup just released that only 2% of their CHROs think that their performance management practices are working. So we as HR people really know that what we're doing isn't working. We're aware of it, but we're not really necessarily taking the steps to change it. And you're right, we didn't really learn. That wasn't part of most of our training. And the interesting thing is, and before I get into that full answer of what we can do, is that the human body, to your point, was biologically designed for a world where we're trying to survive. So where we're trying to survive threats, outrun the predator, deal with not enough food or not enough resources. But when it comes to the world we live in today, you can't outrun workplace stress. You can't fight it off. It's not a monster that you can fight and then expend that stress out of your body or move that stress out of your body. So what happens is that stress builds up in our bodies. And we're in a world because of technology where we're exposed to so much more stress and things are changing faster. We're having to adopt new technologies faster. And so the human body really wasn't built for the world that we're living in. And while evolution is supposed to take place over years and years, really slowly, we've evolved our environment, the world that we're living in, a whole lot faster, which means that we have to help our humans, our people, figure out how do they evolve and adapt faster? How do they change in response to the world that they're living in? And because our bodies are wired to resist change, we associate change with pain. We know that change management's a $2 billion industry, right? So we have this resistance to change. Because of that, we have to help our humans figure out what's constraining or keeping them from changing. How do we rewire their neural pathways to move through whatever that resistance is? And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to figure out, how do we learn practices that allow us to understand what is constricting you specifically, Ben? What is holding you back? What's holding this person back? And then train our leaders and managers for how to work with people to make that change, to rewire those pathways.
I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this, right? Because I'm with you on the fact that work is not designed for all these kind of things. From the very beginning, the first idea that you shared, that I'm thinking through all these different things that we're taught. Like in HR, we have to do a lot of things that are probably that run across this. This is maybe why you're so drawn to it, because I often kid that HR's biggest job description is not written as making people do what they don't want to do. Like, how do I get people to do something? In part, when I ask you to do something unexpected or unknown, the first thing you think is, oh gosh, why? Or you have some fear of whatever's next around that corner, but you don't know. It could be great, but we don't know. It still can be fearful and create that mindset where we're not going to lean into it. That's where my mind's wandering across some of those different examples like that.
And that problem is one of the key problems, right? I used to train managers on things and then I couldn't get them to do it, right? They would know what they needed to do. They would even maybe want to do it, but they still wouldn't actually do it. They wouldn't set the expectations. They wouldn't give the feedback, right? They would hold back. And so what I've discovered is that so much of that resistance exists in our body. So the human body actually doesn't just have neural networks in our head brain, but it has neurons and neural networks in our heart and in our digestive system or our gut. And sometimes they even call them the little brain, or you've probably heard the gut brain or the heart brain, or that's some terminology that's out there, but they're really just other neural networks. And actually, and for those that don't know, when I say neural networks are neural connections, those are the messages that get sent in the body that tell your body to do everything that it does. So if I'm going to lift my hand, there's a message that's being sent to lift my hand. And while 20% of the messages that are sent in our body come from our head to our body, and 80% come up from our body to our head. So our head knows what we should do, and it's trying to tell our body what to do. But if our body's been wired, if our body's had experiences throughout our life that tells us to do something else, that 80% is going to win. It's like the monkey trying to direct the elephant, right? The elephant's going to win, right? The monkey might be smarter, but the elephant is bigger and has more power. And so it's hard to get it to do. So we have to actually pay attention to what our heart brains or the neural networks in our heart and our gut are trying to communicate with us or tell us in order to create that change, in order to deal with that embodied behavior or practice. And one of the most staggering statistics, I think, for me was when I realized that 95% of what we do is unconscious. That is wired into what I call our ways of being. It's just part of how we think, feel, and behave because we developed in a certain way in response to all of our environments and experiences.
And see, when you said the 95%, I thought of something else that ties into that too. You mentioned like all the experiences that lead up to that, but I was thinking about the guts and everything else, like all the other pieces there were reminding me. I'd heard this story at one point from this person that I loved and highly respected, just passed away recently, actually. But one of the stories he told was the idea of muscle memory was not even a thing. No one ever thought about that until this scientist was going to button up his jacket one day. He was walking around doing things. And if you were trying to button a shirt or something else, you don't even think about it really. But he realized, like, I've been trying to do this for 5 minutes. And he just paused. What happened? And his granddaughter had sewed the buttonhole close to the joke, just playing with him. Because my brain was trying to do that the whole time. I walked around, did all these things, and he never even stopped to think about what was happening. I wasn't telling it to do that. And so he realized that this was a thing. And so that's what I'm coming back to. So much of what we do, whether it's like that in our day-to-day work, something just out of autopilot, or other pieces like you're talking about. I've had trauma. I've had something else that comes up in my life. And now when I sit in a situation, you may respond this way. I'm going to respond to something completely different, unpredictable to you. But to me, it makes perfect sense to do that potentially just because of where I've come from. So if someone's hearing these things today and they're like, okay, Jessica, what do I actually do? This is interesting. This is neat. This is great. What do I actually do? So when we're at work, what's something that we could be doing or thinking about? How do we be more intentional about this kind of thing instead of just be like, that's a thing. How do I actually put this into practice or think about this ourselves and how to use these principles?
Yeah. So two of the fastest and best things, these are always the things I start with. One is recognizing the state of your nervous system and trying to make sure that you're in balance before you're ever going to do anything that's important. So important meetings, decisions, you're going to give somebody feedback. And there's a really quick way to do this. It takes 2.5 minutes. and you just do 2.5 minutes of balanced breathing. So that just means 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out for 2.5 minutes. And that will bring your nervous system into balance. And it will also bring you present. So often we go into these things still thinking about where we've just come from, what we've just done, or what we still have to do. What's still on my checklist? What do I have to get done? And we're not really present and calm. And what that does is that allows you to have access to those different neural networks, those different intelligences in your body, so that you have your full intelligences online. Think about just turning them on so that you're really using all of your horsepower when you're trying to do something that's important. The second thing is connecting each of those different centers, the head, the heart, and the gut, and bringing them into their best operating state, right? So when we're operating at our best, what state are we in? So our head brain is creative, our heart brain is compassionate, and our gut brain is courageous. And so most of the time, when a person is struggling, when a person is not doing something that they know that they should, or there's some sort of resistance, there's a disconnect between there. They're not aligned and working together. There's some sort of friction. And so you can bring those together by accessing, aligning, and then you can apply them to something. And the way that you do that is you connect with, it takes less than a minute. You connect with your heart and you just think about compassion for yourself and other people. You go up to your head brain and you think about the creativity and accessing that creativity of your head brain and applying it to whatever that situation is. And then you come back to the compassion and you feel compassion for yourself. And then you go connect with that courage in your gut and having the courage to say what needs to be said, to be your authentic self, to show up and take action. And then you just come back and you look at whatever you're about to do or whatever you're about to accomplish through a lens of what's the most creative, compassionate, and courageous me I can be. How can I show up and handle this situation from that state? And what you've done is you've really turned on those different networks and brought them into a state where they can serve you to their best, to where they can really help you produce better results, make better decisions, solve problems, all the things that we really care about, especially in the workplace, accomplishing and having people accomplish well.
The word courage always strikes me. I was interviewing someone the other day for an upcoming event, and one of the things we were talking about was having a little bit of career courage. And so that word strikes me. I'm always a fan of alliteration too. So I've got creativity, compassion, courage. Did I get all of them?
Yep. Creativity, compassion, and courage.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Tremendous. I'll add one more C. So connect. If someone wants to connect with you, wants to hear more about what you're doing, the work you're doing here, wants to hear more about your thoughts on this or other examples, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I'm on all the social channels as Jessica Teitjen JD. So you can find me on any social space. And then my company's name is Evolving to Exceptional, because we're all about how do we evolve the humans and our work practices to help create more exceptional results and experiences for people and workplaces. How do we align those two things together and then help people rewire these pathways so that they can have these better experiences and we can produce better outcomes and results. So evolvingtoexceptional.com, that's our website. You can come check us out there or any of the social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate you for helping every one of the listeners here who We're Only Human evolve a little bit, be more exceptional, ultimately. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.